An ancient secretive faction, one that predated even the Black Sepulcher.
They're supposed to be gone, wiped out centuries ago during the old wars.
Selene muttered as we stalked the city streets, staying to the deep shadows. Clearly not. She shot me a dark look.
And clearly more than just assassins.
I considered that. If Varen had been a target for the Black Sepulcher, why had the Veiled Hand taken him instead? A deeper war was being waged in Venaré, one we had just stepped into, and I had the sinking feeling that for once we weren't the hunters. We were the hunted. The streets of the city whispered as we moved. Selene and I stayed to the shadows, slipping through the labyrinthine alleys where the city's filth festered. Even the lanterns hanging from wrought iron posts flickered as if uneasy in our presence. I could still feel the weight of what we had seen in the Varen estate. The way Varen's body had twisted and reformed, his voice no longer his own. That thing had spoken my name, and the sigil it left behind. The mark of the Veiled Hand. We had stumbled into something far older than a simple assassination contract, something far more dangerous. Dermont's safe house wasn't in some high-born estate or a fortified stronghold. No, he preferred places where men like us could disappear. Tonight, it was an abandoned ossuary beneath the city. A place where the dead whispered louder than the living. Selene and I descended the slick, crumbling stone steps into the darkness below. The air was thick with damp rot and the scent of old, forgotten bones. A single lantern burned at the bottom of the passage. Dermont stood beside it. He looked like hell. Tired? Older than he had any right to be. His noble attire was traded for something plain and dark, though he still held himself like a man who thought himself untouchable. His eyes flicked between the two of us.
You look like you've seen ghosts.
I let out a low breath. We have. Selene stepped forward, her voice sharp.
Varen is dead, but not by our hand.
That made Dermont pause. His grip on the lantern tightened.
Explain.
I told him. Everything. The abandoned estate. The unnatural hunger in Varen's voice. The way the shadows swallowed the room. How his body was no longer his own. And finally, the sigil. The Veiled Hand's mark. Dermont listened without speaking, but I saw it. The brief flicker in his eyes. Recognition. He knew something, and he wasn't surprised. Selene caught it too. She stepped closer, her dagger flashing in the dim light.
You knew, didn't you?
Dermont exhaled, as if carrying a weight too heavy for his old bones. He reached inside his coat and pulled out the small, iron-bound book.
I was hoping I wouldn't have to give this to you. But the moment I heard Varen's name connected to the sepulcher, I knew the past wasn't done with me.
I took the book, feeling the cold metal bindings against my fingers. The cover was worn leather, blackened with age, marked with a symbol not unlike the sigil we had seen. A spiral of interwoven lines. Selene frowned.
Where did you get this?
It belonged to a man I once trusted.
I opened the book. The pages were filled with coded script, lines of intricate markings that seemed to shift the longer I stared at them. But I recognized pieces of it, names, places, and dates. This wasn't just some old journal. This was a ledger. A record of the Veiled Hand's movements in Venaré, and the last few entries were recent. Selene scanned the page over my shoulder, her breath hitching.
This book lists every noble in the city that has ties to them.
A cold chill crept into my chest. I turned to Dermont. And the man you took this from? What happened to him? Dermont's jaw tightened.
He vanished. One night, he simply ceased to exist. No body, no traces, as if he had been swallowed by the city itself.
I closed the book, the weight of it settling in my palm. We weren't just hunting an organization. We were hunting shadows that had already buried themselves deep into the bones of this city. Selene met my gaze.
This changes things.
I nodded. We weren't just assassins anymore. We were something far worse. We were marked. And if Varen's fate was any indication, our time was already running out. The book revealed a name. Lady Lilia Valentis. Another clue worth investigating, perhaps. I took the book with me and Selena and I departed. We reached her estate before dawn. The Varentis manor was a sprawling fortress of stone and silver, draped in banners of deep crimson. Guards patrolled the high walls, torches flickering against the pre-dawn mist. But something was wrong. The main gate was open. Selene and I moved swiftly, staying low, the scent of iron heavy in the air. Inside, the silence was unnatural, a stillness that shouldn't have been there. We found the first body in the entrance hall. A guard, throat slashed open, his eyes frozen wide. Then another. And another. By the time we reached the main chamber, we already knew what we would find. Lady Lilia Varentis sat in her high-backed chair, her silk gown stained dark with blood. A dagger was buried deep in her chest. Carved into the wood of her throne was the same sigil we had seen before, the mark of the veiled hand. Selene exhaled sharply.
Dermont said this ledger belonged to someone who vanished. What if they didn't disappear? What if they were silenced?
I studied the sigil. Freshly carved. No, this isn't a cover-up. I pulled the book from my belt and flipped back to the list of names. Lady Lilia's name was already marked. Someone had been following this book like a blueprint. Someone was cleaning house. Time was slipping through our fingers like sand. Lady Lilia Varentis was dead. Another name crossed out in the book. Another step taken by a force we barely understood. Selene and I didn't have the luxury of mourning the dead. We had only one lead left, Lord Adrian Vance, the next name on the list. He wasn't just some noble. He was one of the 12, a council of the most powerful individuals in the city. If he was tied to the veiled hand, we needed to know why. And if he was next on their list, we had to get to him before his killers did.
We need to move tonight.
I leaned against the table, eyes on the open ledger. Vance is careful. He'll be expecting someone to come for him. If we charge in too soon, we walk into a trap. She exhaled through her nose, gaze flicking to the book.
Then what do you suggest?
I tapped my fingers against the wood. We don't go in through the front door. We make him come to us. The Vance estate was an opulent structure perched on the edge of the city's upper district, where the wealthiest lived high above the streets. Golden domes, spired towers, balconies lined with enchanted lanterns. He wanted people to see his power. I didn't plan to go anywhere near it. Instead, I left a message, a carefully folded letter, slipped into the hands of one of his trusted servants. The ink was mixed with a subtle alchemical compound, one that would dissolve the words within an hour. Lord Vance, your name is written in the ledger. Lilia was first. You are next. If you want to live, come to the Black Vellum. Alone. The Black Vellum was a secluded tea house deep in the Lantern Quarter, known for hosting quiet meetings between people who didn't want to be seen together. It was neutral ground, and that was exactly what we needed. Selene and I arrived early, taking a hidden alcove near the back. The dim lanterns cast long shadows, the scent of jasmine and burnt sugar filling the air. We waited, and then he arrived. Lord Adrian Vance was a thin man in his late 50s, draped in midnight blue robes lined with silver embroidery. He moved with a stiffness that suggested years of wielding power had worn away any softness he once had. He sat across from us, his fingers curling against the edge of the table.
If this is a trick, I will have your heads before the hour is done.
I ignored the threat. You're marked for death. The veiled hand is closing in. If you know why, now is the time to speak. His eyes darkened.
I know exactly why.
Then do tell us.
Because I was part of it, once.
He unveiled the truth and revealed the whereabouts of Darian Kreth's former dwelling. Selene and I exchanged knowing glances at the mention of the dead man's name, a specter from the past now thrust into the present. Then, without hesitation, I turned to Lord Vance and gave a solemn nod. Our work here was finished. There was no time left to waste. The undercroft of Venaré stretched before us, a labyrinth of forgotten corridors and cold, damp stone. The air was thick with the scent of mildew and stagnant water, and the dim glow of our lantern cast flickering shadows along the cracked walls. Footsteps echoed in the distance. Ours, but perhaps not only ours. Selene moved beside me, silent as a phantom, her fingers grazing the hilt of her dagger. There was tension in her posture, the kind that only came from knowing we were walking into something far bigger than either of us had prepared for.
You're sure this is the place?
I nodded. Dermont's book had marked this location, hidden beneath the city's streets, as a sanctum, a meeting ground for the city's unseen rulers. If the veiled hand operated here, we would find proof, or bodies.
We are being watched.
I didn't answer. I already knew. Pushing the door open, we stepped inside. Torchlight flickered along the stone chamber's walls, and waiting for us, seated in a high-backed chair, was a man who should have been dead. Darian Kreth. I felt Selene tense beside me, her breath hitching ever so slightly. Kreth had been executed years ago, burned at the stake, erased. Yet here he was, alive, untouched, and smiling as if he had expected us all along.
Raezur, right on time.
I didn't move. Every assassin's instinct screamed at me that this was a trap. Kreth was dead. I had seen the flames take him, watched his execution from the rooftops of the city, just another shadow in the crowd. And yet here he was. Selene was rigid beside me, her blade half drawn. Her silence spoke volumes. Kreth studied us with a patient amusement, his long fingers drumming against the armrest of his chair. His coat was finely tailored, the high collar framing sharp aristocratic features. The years had not softened him. They had refined him.
You're wondering how I survived? How I came to sit here when history insists I should be dust?
I said nothing. Words were wasted on men like him. Kreth smirked.
Clever assassin, you always did know when to listen.
Selene took a step forward, her voice like steel.
You're working with the veiled hand?
Oh, Selene, such a small view of the world. The veiled hand. They're nothing more than one of many threads. The real power in our beloved city runs deeper.
I shifted my weight, subtly preparing to strike. Then tell me, Kreth, if you've already won, why am I still breathing? His dark eyes gleamed.
Because, Raezur, I have use for you.
The torches snuffed out. Darkness swallowed the chamber, thick and suffocating. I moved first. I had learned to fight in the blind. My blade lashed out, aimed where Kreth had sat. But my knife met nothing. A whisper of air, movement, then pain. Something slammed into my ribs, sending me sprawling. I caught myself, rolling to my feet, daggers flashing in the void. Selene's breath was ragged somewhere to my left. A faint gasp, a struggle. The sound of steel meeting steel. And then, laughter. Kreth's voice cut through the darkness like a blade.
You are dealing with things that are beyond your comprehension, Raezur.
The torches flared back to life. Kreth stood untouched, his long coat immaculate, his silver-threaded cuffs glinting. Around us lay bodies. Not ours, theirs. I hadn't even seen them move, but they had died, quick and silent, by unseen hands. Selene turned to me, her expression dark.
We need to leave, now.
I agreed. But Kreth wasn't done yet. He exhaled as if disappointed.
You still don't understand, do you?
And then I saw it. The shadows at his feet moved. Not with the light, not naturally. They coiled like living things, like creatures obeying his will.
That's not magic.
No, it was something worse. I moved first. A feint. Left dagger for his throat, right for his heart. Kreth didn't block. He didn't even flinch. Something slammed into me. Not physical, but a force. Like unseen fingers curling around my ribs and squeezing. I choked as I was thrown backward, skidding against the stone floor. Selene was already moving, her blade flashing. A mistake. Kreth barely lifted a hand. She was lifted off her feet and hurled into the wall. The crack of impact made my stomach tighten. He stepped toward me, slow, deliberate, predatory.
You were always the best, Raezur, but you've been playing in the shadows too long. You don't see the real darkness.
I forced myself up. Pain meant nothing. I had one last move. I flicked my wrist, a throwing knife shot toward his eye. It stopped, mid-air. Hung there, trembling before the shadows devoured it. Kreth exhaled.
Venaré will fall, assassin, and when it does,
He knelt beside me.
I will need you.
The shadows closed in. I woke to the scent of rain. Venaré stretched before me, veiled in mist, its rooftops jagged shadows against the pale dawn. The streets below were empty, save for the occasional lantern swinging in the wind. The city felt wrong.